those, right? And if you have any questions, feel free to stop me right then and there, and I'll be happy to answer any of the questions that you guys have. All right. Great. Awesome. All right. So this is what our topic is. Just a quick introduction about myself. You can find me on Twitter here. That's my Twitter handle. I also happen to blog at enterprisedaddy.com. If you go to this website, you're mostly going to see stuff related to VMware and Microsoft. And I have a day job. I work with Rubrik as a senior technical support engineer. Rubrik is a data management company where we basically deal with backup, restore, archival, copy data management, search analytics, all that kind of stuff. My little background about myself, I actually started my career as a sysadmin working with iGate, which is now overtaken by Capgemini. There was when I actually got introduced to technologies like your Windows, VMware, Exchange, and to an extent Citrix as well. So that's when I first got introduced to VMware technology and a lot of Microsoft related stuff related to Active Directory, DNS, DHCP. I also used to handle to an extent Exchange 2007 and 2010 servers. But if you ask me anything about them, I wouldn't know because it's just been more than 3 years. I haven't had any hands-on experience. I joined Rubrik about 8 months back. And prior to that, I was with VMware as a technical support engineer, primarily working on the vSphere product line, which is your ESXi and vCenter server. All right. So what we're basically going to cover today, this is the agenda, a rough overview of what we're going to look at. Firstly, we have to understand what are your disaster recovery fundamentals, right? Stuff like your definitions and all that stuff we're going to look at. The two most important services that are available within Azure, which is your Azure Site Recovery, which is used for replication purposes. So if you were to compare this to another product line, which folks are usually used to, is something like a VMware SRM, right? It does similar features. It basically allows you to replicate your virtual machine from one location to another. Mostly people are going to use this for on-prem to cloud, but you can actually use this across, let's say, Hyper-V to Hyper-V as well. That's also possible. The second service that we're going to look at today is Azure Backup. As the name suggests, it's basically going to be used for backup and restore purposes. So it is pretty common. I think we as IT professionals know this, or actually we being in the support industry know this very often or see this very often. A disaster happens. For example, Balu had to deal with something the other day where he mentioned that he had 150 VMs that actually went down all at once because of a data corruption that happened at the storage level, right? So this is pretty common. The question is, are we prepared for it, right? So let's first understand what disaster recovery means. Now, this is a definition taken from NIST. It basically means a set of policies and procedures which focus on protecting an organization. This organization can be anything from a significant effect in case of a negative event, which may include, these are different ways that you can actually see a disaster happen, which are like a cyber attack or a natural disaster, let's say earthquake or a tsunami happen, right? Or a building or a device failure. So if there's a problem with your hardware or a software level, that can also cause a disaster in your infrastructure. What are the different types of disasters? First one is natural. This is a natural calamity that can happen anywhere. And most often or not, you would see this actually being one of the most common ones. Second type is going to be hardware and software failures. These are pretty common. For example, if you had a physical host that went down, all the VMs or any sort of applications running on them will also be going down. Software failures can also happen. For example, if you have an application running on top of a virtual machine that's gone down, if you have a disaster recovery in place, you can actually go ahead and boot up your application from your secondary site. Malicious software, this is pretty common. In today's age of internet, this is one of the most common ones that you actually see, and you've heard of different kind of malicious softwares that were introduced a couple of years back. human error, another thing, right? Somebody deleted a VM, or yeah, for example, Bala's example, something went something went wrong on the storage array. Somebody recently, I was dealing with a customer where a user accidentally deleted a 12 terabyte volume from the backend storage, and they had to actually go ahead and recover those VMs from a secondary software. And there are many more other reasons, but these are the most common ones that we actually see that happen out in the world. Some of the common definitions I would like you guys to know before we proceed with looking at how site recovery and backups work. These are the common definitions. Firstly, we need to understand what is a recovery point objective. This basically means how much data loss is the company willing to accept, right? So if you look at any of your backup or recovery software, this is one of the most common things that you'll actually go ahead and configure. So for example, Rubric allows you to configure a minimum RPO of 15 minutes, which means that your primary virtual machine is going to be backed up or replicated every 15 minutes. So something goes wrong, you will have a data loss of 15 minutes. And this is going to be planned at the time of your design implementation or when you design. So these are some of the things that you need to consider, right? Recovery time objective. So this is another definition that you need to know. This basically means how much time is the company willing to go without the application being recovered, right? So this is usually in hours, and usually the RPO is in a few minutes, right? So it depends on what your plan is and how you're going to implement it. So there are a couple of other things: work recovery time, maximum tolerable downtime, and a business impact analysis, right? So we'll actually look at this here. This kind of explains those definitions in a better manner. So let's assume, so X is your time, X-axis is time. Business as usual, the first green arrow mark that you see on your extreme left-hand side is business as usual. That was the last backup point that was taken, right? And a disaster happened. So that becomes your RPO, right? You see on the top, and that's how much company is willing to accept the data loss, right? So any data changes that were made, those are basically going to be lost. And there is the first yellow arrow mark, right? That basically defines you basically recovered from that situation, right? Whatever VMs were replicated or whatever applications were replicated on a secondary site, those have come back online. That becomes your RTO, saying that how much time is it going to take for the organization to run back on its feet, right? And once, obviously, just an example that you guys were talking about, VMware tools was installed, you rebooted the virtual machine, and you then hand over that virtual machine to the application team to verify that the application is running fine or not. That becomes your WRT, right? And RTO plus WRT becomes your MDT, right? And post the last yellow arrow to and the last green arrow, this is something that you again have to decide when you're designing your infrastructure. So it can be possible that not all your primary VMs are going to be replicated, right? So for example, if I have a primary infrastructure where I run 5 web servers, I don't want to replicate all of them in my secondary site because I do not have that much cost of that much money available to perform that on the other end, right? So I might just go ahead and replicate or backup 2 out of the 5 web servers, right? So the system is up and running, but it's in a functional state, but it's in a degraded state, right? It's functional but degraded. So any questions around these definitions? Okay, I'll take that as a no. These are the phases of disaster recovery planning. Whenever you have to act, if organization, let's assume that you are actually architect who is supposed to design your recovery operations. These are the steps that you will actually go ahead and perform before you even implement something, right? So first is identifying, saying what are the systems available that I need to actually go ahead and backup or restore. I'm sorry, backup and replicate. That becomes your first stage one, which is identify, which is risk assessment. As I said, you might not want to replicate or backup every of your primary infrastructure. You would just want to back up your production. Dev test is not so important. You're willing to have that VMs not backup, and in case something goes wrong, you're okay with those VMs gone forever. Second is analyzing, which actually constitutes your business impact analysis, saying that, okay, I've identified what it is, and then you analyze as to what you want to back up and what you don't want to back up or replicate. You then design the system. That's basically a strategy selection. Under this, stuff like your RPU and RTO comes into picture, right? You basically design saying that I'm willing to have so much data loss, and I'm willing to recover my infrastructure in so much time. You then go ahead and implement that. This is where you actually go ahead and create stuff like your recovery plans, your RPOs and RTOs. So design is just having a high-level overview of what you're going to do. Implement is where you'll actually go ahead and create those RPOs and RTOs and the recovery plans, what to replicate, what not to replicate. And last but not the least, having a plan and replicating everything on the other side doesn't mean it's going to work on the other side, right? You have to actually go ahead and measure whether are you getting what you have actually designed for, right? So that's the last phase, which basically you test and maintain your actual recovery plans. There are three different types of failover types that you would see typically in the recovery process. The first one is the planned. This is the most common one that you see in an infrastructure, where you want to make sure that whatever you're replicating on the other side is working as expected, right? So organizations that I have seen, most of the organizations that I have seen actually have a planned migration or a planned replication test that they do every 3 months or every 6 months, right? This is just to make sure that whatever you are replicating is available and up to date, right? And this does not have any impact to your production. So you basically do it in a planned manner. Folks are upfront informed about this, and this is done in a way that production is not impacted. The second failover type that you would typically see is an unplanned one. The process is tested regularly in a manner that does not impact production, right? This is just done on the fly, right? You just want to test that everything is working okay. That's another one. And the last one is the test one, right? The process is tested regularly in a manner that does not impact production. Okay, I think I have messed up this. Yeah, I think, yeah. So basically testing, you perform a test failover to make sure that everything is working okay. There are three different site types when you actually talk about disaster recovery. The first type is called a hot site, which basically means that it's a duplicate of your original primary infrastructure with real-time replication happening. So your RTO is going to be in a few minutes here, right? The second one is a warm site systems, but without replication of data. Basically meaning to say that you really do not have real-time replication going on here. You have to restore your primary infrastructure using backups. The third one is a cold site, a location but may not have required equipment readily available, right? And let's assume that this is something going to be where you have a tape infrastructure, right? So we do see often that you actually go ahead and back up some of your stuff on tape. Now, recovering from tape can usually take a few hours, depending on how much data that needs to be recovered. So these are the three site types that you have, and so obviously, up until now, this is a common question that a lot of people ask. I have been doing this on-prem from past 20, 30 years. Why should I go ahead and choose cloud as my DR site, right? It's a very valid question. So a few reasons that I've listed out here. The first reason would be traditional DR site is expensive. And if you look at, I'm sure you guys have noticed that it is not very often that you actually use your DR site. You only use it for testing purposes, right? It's very rare that you actually go ahead and perform an unplanned migration on the other side. Cloud gives you a consumption-based model. It's basically pay as you go, right? Whatever services that you use in the cloud, you go ahead and pay for it. That's one of the beauty of the cloud. There are no upfront costs. the operational costs are actually limited to what you use. Compute charges are minimal. As I was telling you, if you were to do a traditional replication onto your secondary site, 95% of the time, your VMs on the other side are actually turned off, right? I mean, you're only replicating the data on the other side. So you do not pay for compute charges on the cloud unless you don't power on your instances or virtual machines. You only pay for storage consumption. So whenever the data is replicated, you go ahead and pay only for that storage consumption. Now, the storage consumption can also vary depending on what sort of storage account that you use in Azure. There are different types of accounts, but that's something that we can discuss in a later session where we look at the different storage options available within Azure. Scalability, right? This is one of the important things about cloud, where you see it is infinitely scalable. If you were to go ahead, for example, there was a survey done recently, and they found out from the time an order is placed for any sort of hardware, it takes a minimum of 60 to 90 days to go ahead and get that and implement in your physical data center. So scalability is something which has always been a concern in a traditional data center. But that's not the case with the cloud, right? You instantly can go ahead and provision anything that you want, and it's highly scalable compared to your traditional data centers. Highly secure. There's a lot of questions that come around this. Is cloud really secure? But if you go and look at the statistics, most of the data breaches that have happened in the traditional data centers. If you just have to go look at Azure, the number of certifications the security certifications that they have, it's humongous, right? I mean, no traditional data center will actually be able to have so many certifications, and nobody can claim that traditional data centers are more secure than the cloud, which is absolutely untrue from what we've seen. So those were just the fundamentals about understanding what disaster recovery is, and some of the definitions that we saw, different types of sites, and different types of failover scenarios that can actually happen, right? So again, since we're talking about Azure, Azure has something called site recovery, which basically allows you to replicate your VMs from Hyper-V and VMware, and also your physical machines onto the cloud. This can also be used as a migration tool. So if you look at the pricing of Azure Site Recovery, first 30 days is free of cost. All you really need is some components that has to be taken care on the Azure side, and you can then start replicating your infrastructure onto the cloud. So first 30 days, you're not going to be charged anything except the storage that you consume, as I was telling you earlier. But if you go beyond 30 days, there's a charge that you need to pay for for every instance or every virtual machine that you're replicating onto the cloud. And the reason I was telling that this works as a migration tool, if you were to migrate all of your VMs or your infrastructure from on-prem to cloud within the first 30 days, that migration is free of cost from Azure. Any questions?
Yes, this is Core. Perfect. So the first question, in the cloud, is it support deduplication?
Not really, right? I don't think so. The reason being that's something that we really don't care, because this is not a secondary storage. We're not talking about backup.
Perfectly. But let's say I'm replicating my same node, which is running with the Windows Server 2016, okay? And the similar kind of files and index are there, right? But those are part of cluster and the database, okay? So in such scenario, we use deduplication, okay? But for me, the question is very simple. Deduplication functions are available in Azure or not?
No, it isn't. By default, it isn't.
Okay. Okay. What type of certificate? Is it used for data encryption?
Sorry, come again?
You talk about certificate, right?
Uh-huh.
So what type of certificate and what what is the use case of certificate?
When I say certificate, what I mean is, security-based certifications. For example, are you HIPAA certified, right? So if you are a
So
healthcare
compliance,
business, compliance, yeah, exactly.
industry compliance.
Industry compliances, right? So that's what I was talking about there, right?
Not, yes, go ahead.
Encryption is available as well. Once the data is on a storage account, you have encryption at rest that you can use in Azure storage accounts.
So it's first get replicated and then get encrypted.
Exactly, yes. And all your communication from your on-prem to your Azure cloud. So there are different ways that you can do this. If you have express route, that's basically a dedicated link between your on-prem to cloud, which is again secure. The communication on the wire is secure, and the one that goes on the internet is also SSL based communication. So that's secure as well.
What about second replication? Azure to any other cloud I can replicate?
No, I don't think that's possible at this point. Because,
so do we have in Azure, do we have a geolocation based segregation? I want to replicate, let's say, from India to Singapore and then Singapore to US. I want to replicate the same data, but first I want to on-prem to cloud, and then second I want to Singapore cloud to US. You can assume anything, Dallas, Texas, what is.
Okay. So where this work, the way this works is when you create a storage account, there are different types of replication options available, right? One of the thing is locally redundant storage, which basically means, so in Azure, you have something called regions, right? Within that region, you might have multiple data centers, right? So locally redundant is basically saying that within that region, I'll go ahead and replicate your data to different data centers. If one data center goes down, your data is still available. And you again have something called geo-redundant storage, right? GRS, which basically means that it's going to be replicated between two different regions, right? Now, there are a few catch around that. Not all, so you don't get the choice saying, for example, your question was, can I replicate from India to Singapore, right? That's not really possible because Azure has limited in terms of saying that, East Coast can replicate only to West Coast, for example, right? And there's a web page around this. I can actually go ahead and forward that to you at a later time, which explains, how this geo replication happens and which region to which region it is supported.
So first thing, I cannot choose the region. Yeah, I can choose only region, not from one region to second region.
Correct. So whenever you create an Azure storage account, you will be asked where do you want to create this resource, right? So depending on where your application resides or where you want to perform this, let's just stay with site recovery, right? So wherever you want to replicate or wherever you want to replicate these VMs, you have to create a storage account and you'll have to provide a region where this data needs to reside.
Yes, correct.
And when you create the storage account, you'll be given an option what type of storage account you want, right? Is it locally redundant storage? Is it geo-redundant storage? And a couple of more that I can share with you at a later time. But you will.
The storage tiering options are available. I can choose as per my budgets and plans.
Exactly. So you have premium storage and you have regular storage, right? Premium storage is all SSDs. You have better IOPS and better speed. And regular storage is magnetic disks.
So I can use any. Sorry.
Yes. You can go ahead and use any of the options that you like.
Not option exactly. So because I just try to understand all use case on premises to cloud. Okay. So I can use any SRA, means storage array plugins, to make it orchestrated. So whatever things are get right on my array level on the on-premises, that need to be migrated. Or is it going to migrate it through the VM level only?
No, this is at this time VM level only, right?
And it is required only Hyper-V, or I can use VMware environment to migrate to Azure?
You can use VMware, Hyper-V, and also your physical machines.
Also?
Physical workloads, physical Windows or physical Linux. Yeah.
So for physical, it's having agent, right?
Exactly.
like a DPM agent?
Yes, we'll look into that. It's actually called mobility agent. So we'll look at that in the future slides.
No problem. So
Great.
it's all right. Thank you. Thank
Okay,
you.
no problem.
One question, Adil. Will
Uh-huh.
the Azure site recovery support failback? I know we can do from on-premises
Yes,
to cloud, right? Cloud to on-premises supported?
it is supported, yes.
Like, okay.
So you have a failback option as well. In your recovery plans, you can actually go ahead and define that as well, right? So once it's migrated, you've done your testing, all the new writes are going to Azure cloud right now, the VM that is spun on Azure, and all the new writes are happening there. If you want to keep that data, you can always fail back, and that information, whatever was new writes happen, will actually go back to your original VM as well. So if in a case of a test or a planned migration, you can actually go ahead and do that as well. All right.
Yep, got it. Thank you.
Awesome. So as I was telling you, there are multiple data sources that you can actually use to perform this replication, and this is just not for Azure itself. As I was telling you, you can do Hyper-V to Hyper-V as well. It then acts like an orchestration tool, right? And again, second option is again Hyper-V to Hyper-V on premises. The third one is Hyper-V to Microsoft Azure. In our demo today, we'll see Hyper-V to Microsoft Azure. You can then do physical VMware or physical to VMware as well, right? So it basically acts like orchestration tool there as well. And the last one is VMware or physical workloads to Microsoft Azure. So in our demo today, we'll be actually looking at scenario 3 and 5. So basically, the solution gives you automated VM level replication and failover, right? Planned and unplanned failovers are available. As we spoke earlier, what are the failover types? It can actually act as an orchestrated recovery plan for disaster recovery. This is in case of your on-prem that we saw, Hyper-V to Hyper-V and VMware to VMware. That's possible as well. You can actually go ahead and test failover without impacting your productions. That's what we saw earlier in our definitions. And again, finally, it actually acts like a migration tool. You can migrate from anywhere to Azure. So this is the most important thing that is part of Azure Site Recovery and Azure Backups. It is something called a Recovery Services Vault. This is where your actual data is stored, right? So let's look at definitions of this. It's basically a storage entity in Azure that houses your data, whatever you're replicating or whatever you're backing up. This is created a specific region. This should answer your question, Kuvar, right? When you create a recovery services vault, you'll have to specify which region that you want to create, like any other ARM resource in Azure. Some of the key features are about this recovery services vault are it has so prior to recovery services vault, there was something called backup vault that was used for Azure backups, right? But as of November 2016, I remember everything was converted to recovery services vault, which is why you see the first option. It has enhanced capabilities to secure backup data. Second, there are monitoring capabilities available within Azure that you can use to monitor the recovery services vault. It allows you to have role-based access control as well, using stuff like Azure Active Directory and all that stuff. You can protect all configurations of Azure virtual machines. So in my previous example, I actually didn't show. Another use case is that you can actually replicate Azure virtual machines as well. That's possible, and that gives you a capability of instant restore for your IaaS VMs. So this is how the two demos that we'll be seeing today. I have a small lab setup. Let's see how the demo gods are today, but this is how we're going to look at. This is one of the things that we're going to look at, Hyper-V to Azure, right? If you look at on screen, this is a single Hyper-V host. It also works when you have System Center Virtual Machine Manager. you can use that as well to perform replication. But in this example, I'm just looking at a single Hyper-V host. The way this would work is I would have to install a lightweight agent on my Hyper-V host, which will allow me to discover what VMs are running on the Hyper-V machine, right? And if I'm going, okay, I haven't shown anything related to the express route, but the double arrow mark that you see on the screen, it's SSL based traffic, so it's encrypted by default. It goes on the internet if you don't have an express route configured, and that then allows you to perform orchestrated replication and failovers of your virtual machines, right? So this was for a single Hyper-V host. Now, if I have a SCVMM managing my Hyper-V machines, I'm going to install the agent on my Hyper-V host, but the Azure Site Recovery provider will only be installed on my SCVMM server. Rest of the stuff remains the same, and again, the replication traffic goes either on the express route or over the internet. Now, for Hyper-V workloads, what do we really have to do? These are the 5 steps that you actually do. You need to prepare Azure. So I'll actually be taking you through the steps on Azure as to what the preparation means. This is nothing but creating your virtual networks, creating your storage accounts, creating your Azure recovery services vault. That basically is what we're talking there, saying that we need to prepare services on Azure before we can actually perform replication, right? You then go ahead and prepare your on-premises Hyper-V machine. What that really means is basically installing those agents and providers that we just saw in the previous slide, and which can then allow us so that Azure Site Recovery can actually detect what VMs are present on the on-prem Hyper-V host. You then go ahead and set up disaster recovery, which is where you go ahead and define how often do you want to replicate, when do you want to replicate, what are your RPOs, RTOs, and all that stuff. The fourth one is optional. If you're doing this on VMM, if you have a CVMM server, but in my lab, I don't have that. So we're just going to look at a very simple Hyper-V host replicating to Azure. And finally, you just go ahead and run the disaster recovery drill. So we'll actually go ahead and perform a test failover, and you will see that virtual machine will instantly be up in the Azure cloud. So we'll drill down into each of these steps. So for prepare Azure, these are the 4 things that you actually need to do that I was telling you earlier. You need to create a storage account. You need to create a recovery services vault, and you have to go ahead and create at least one virtual network. Within that, you can have your own, subnets. You can also go ahead and have your security groups for inbound and outbound traffic management. If you look at on-prem Hyper-V preparation, basically you need to review the Hyper-V host and VM requirements. So anything that is supported on Hyper-V is supported on Azure as well. So if you are running something that's unsupported on Hyper-V, that VM may or may not boot on Azure, right? So you got to be very careful about that. Second, you need to make sure that you have a good internet connectivity if you're going on the internet. Otherwise, you will have a dedicated link from your on-prem data center to Azure. Prepare the VM so that they're accessible after failover. In certain cases, you will have to make sure that you provide information about the accounts that you need accounts that you need to install the mobility agents and all that, right? Right. So basically, select a protection goal. This is what you would do to set up disaster recovery. You then set up your source and target replication environment, source being Hyper-V, target being your Azure. You will then create a replication policy where you will define how often you want to replicate the VMs, and you finally go ahead and enable the replication for that virtual machine. To run, basically set up an isolated network as typically you would see in SRM, where you create a bubble network. Similarly, this creates an isolated network for test failovers. And we will go ahead and run a test failover for a single virtual machine, right? And failover and failback is possible. Once I run a failover to Azure, I can reprotect that virtual machine back on on-prem as well, and then perform a failback operation. And I can then reprotect on-prem VMs to start replication back to Azure. So that answers Paulo's question: is failback possible? It definitely is possible. So okay. So what I'll do is I'm going to stop the slides for a moment and actually show you guys what we need to do here, right? So this is my Azure account, right? So firstly, I have to, as I said, when you're performing preparation, you'll have to go ahead and create a storage account. In my case, I have created the storage account here, right? And I'll just show you, let's assume that you actually click on add. What are the options that you need to provide, right? You have to provide the name for your storage, right? Deployment model, always go with resource manager. That's what Microsoft recommends. And what is the account type, right? This basically tells you general purpose 1, general purpose 2, and blob storage. Blob storage, don't use it. Most of the times general purpose 1 is sufficient in most cases. And Kuvar, your question was, where do I select it, right? So basically you have so many regions where Microsoft operates the data centers, right? So I can go ahead and create and select any region I want. And
question on the location topic, right? When we choose the specific location, the time also depends, right? Like how much the replicate cost basically, right? Like 10 minutes delay or 1 hour, depends upon the distance between the two locations, right, where you are and the target location. So does Microsoft offers any kind of suggested location when we choose the replication?
It is always recommended to choose a region or a location which is closest to your applications or virtual machines, right? So suppose your data center is in India, it makes sense that you use some region in India. In India, we have, I think, 2 or 3 locations. We have West India, South India, and yeah, we only have 2 locations within India. I'm sorry, Central India, right? So the Central India, I think off the top of my head, the data center is located in Mumbai. For West, I'm not too sure, but South is in Chennai, right? So let's assume that your data center is located in Bangalore. The most common thing or the location that you would ideally want to choose is South India, because that's going to be closest to your physical presence of your data center.
That is right. But any like a tool kind of thing that we can see the performance across different regions?
I'm sorry, I didn't get your question.
Any kind of a tool that will give you metrics, like which is which.
I'm not sure. Maybe there might be, but I can get back to you on that. Off the top of my head, I don't know. I don't know that answer properly.
That's okay. Just as a curious question, always.
Okay, cool. And replication, right? These are the options available: locally redundant, geo-redundant, read access, geo-redundant, right? So the most cheapest of all is locally redundant storage. Geo-redundant is usually 2 times the cost of LRS, and you then have RAGRS as well, right? And secure transfer required, disabled by default. Performance tier I was talking to you about, right? Standard and premium. Standard is all going to be magnetic disks, magnetic disks, and premium is all SSDs, right? And obviously you have to provide a subscription where you're creating these storage accounts. And resource groups. Resource groups basically allow you to perform a logical construct where you can then go ahead and apply your policies and all that, right? And do you want to? So here itself, the second part was for us to create an Azure virtual network, right? So if I click on this, it gives me a drop down where I can create either a new virtual network, how many subnets I want, and all that stuff is available from the same blade. But ideally, you might want to just go to virtual networks and go ahead and create from there. So I'm just going to cancel out of this. So if you look at my storage account, it's created in South India. I have geo-redundant replication. My performance tier is standard, and this is the resource group where the storage account is created. All right. So that's one. And second, I need a virtual network, as I was telling you guys earlier. I have created one VNet. Within that, let's go ahead and drill down and see how many subnets do I have. I have a default subnet 198.68.0.0. And let's look at, I think that's all you need to know on this page. The address space tells you how many addresses are actually available. This is a /16 CIDR, so a lot of devices that you can actually, a lot of VMs or resources that you can actually deploy here. Last but not the least, my recovery services vault, that's here. I have one recovery services vault created, that's also in South India, and it's under the same resource group. So as I said, use resource groups to, let's assume that you're performing, actually, in the context of VMs, let's assume that you have certain type of application, then go ahead and have those applications into one resource group, because then you can then go ahead and apply some policies to that, right? So that's the recommendation. But again, there's a limitation. Don't go overboard with creating as many resource groups that you want. Microsoft has a hard limit of 800 resource groups per subscription, right? And within each resource group, you can have 800 resources, right? So if I were to go to my resource groups, for example, and let's just go to this guy, these are my resources within that resource group, right? So you see this here. Any questions up until now here?
Yes, so first
Hi,
question.
this is Rajesh. Okay. Okay, continue. I will ask later.
No, please go ahead.
What is the backup throughput? Because if I want to take a backup of one VM with 100 GB, and how much will be the standard throughput we'll get it?
See, again, on the internet, you really can't define much. It really depends on how much you have available on-prem. So if your data is flowing out, just give me 1 minute. So yeah, it basically depends on how much you have available on-prem, right? So if you have a 10 gig switch going out, and that's how much you're going to get, depending on what other applications they're running and all of that. And again, if you have Express Route, I think Express Route gives you a 10 gig link off the top of my head, or a 1 gig link. I'm not too sure, but again, that's definable, and you can actually talk. Again, that's an extra cost, right? So it depends on what sort of cost that your company is willing to bear.
No, I question you like that. Okay, if you have like as you said, there is a storage type is there, like a standard generally is there, blob is there. So if I am choosing blob, there will be a throughput which will be getting into the Azure account actually, not from our internet, because if I am using a high speed internet, and what will be the throughput over there, the Azure means like data transfer. There will be some limit, right? Example, if you are using a normal standard backup solutions over there will be data transfer rate to writing. It's like a 40 MB, 60 MB, or
Okay,
more than 100.
okay. Okay, great. So you're basically talking about how many IOPS and all that is available, right? So there
Yes,
is a there's a standard. I mean, these numbers are difficult to remember, but there is a good source available on Microsoft's website, which I can then hand over to you. Which, off the top of my head, I think you get 500 IOPS, for example, for a premium disk. But whereas a standard disk gives you only about 60 or 80. I'm not too sure, but that's something that we can actually go ahead and look at.
that will be standard, or we can increase it based on our requirement, like number of disk adding more, or how?
No, it's per disk
Is there?
basis, right? No, that's not configurable.
Okay. And what is the options for application backups? Like example, if you want to take a backup of SQL database or Oracle database, is it supported, or?
There are no native capabilities. It's just virtual machine based at this time.
Okay.
So if you want to back up SQL using a native sort of an application, that's not available at this time.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem. I'm not too sure where was my Hyper-V server role installed. So I want to show you the VM that I have here on my Hyper-V.
So it's your cluster deployment for Hyper-V or a standalone Hyper-V node you are looking for?
No, I'm looking at standalone.
Okay.
That's surprising. I don't find it. I don't know why.
So I think what you have to do, just type avis.cpl.
Sorry, what? Appwiz.cpl?
Yep.
Okay.
.cpl. Just enter. See the install role and features. Is it? It's having service agent. Okay, go ahead.
No, you mean server manager? Install role and features?
There we can also check, or from here also we can check it.
Okay. Let's just go from here because I'm a little more familiar. Oh, Hyper-V manager. Thanks, man.
Yeah.
So this is my Hyper-V machine. I have one virtual machine called Win 2012 ASR test created, right? And on this Hyper-V host, I have the agent part and the provider part installed, right? And how do I get this? I'll just quickly show that to you guys here. So once I go to a recovery vault, once I've created that, and if I go click on that, the whole thing that I really like here is, this blade is basically divided into different things, right? So firstly, you just get a high level overview of what it is, and then you have some settings. What you are really interested in is in the getting started page, right? So I want to get started with site recovery, right? I want to prepare my infrastructure. So if I click on this, it's then going to quickly ask me from what I'm planning to do, right? So it's going to be on-prem, right? Where do you want to replicate? I want to replicate to Azure, and I'm going to do with Hyper-V. Am I using SCVMM or not? I'm just going to say no and say okay. Then takes me to the next page. Basically telling me has the agent and the provider been already installed? If it isn't, I can just, I'm sorry, this is the deployment planner, right? So I can just click on this and it will give me a rough estimate of, what my infrastructure is, uh, network bandwidth required, storage and other requirements to meet my replication needs. So it's going to go and what is my primary infrastructure and what are my needs that are going to be on Azure, right? So I can download this utility and gather information. I'm just going to, for this demo purposes, I'm just going to say, yes, I've already done that. And then the preparation part on the source actually is where it needs, right? So ideally, you will have to create a Hyper-V site first, right? This is just a logical construct that we have to create, but in my case, I've already done that. And from there, I have to actually go ahead and select the Hyper-V virtual machine. So this definition that I have provided is going to come once I install the agent on my Hyper-V host. So once I create that, I'll have to provide this Hyper-V site information. It's automatically going to pull from there, right? So I'm just going to say okay. On target, I just have to define what subscription and the deployment model, which is resource manager, which is definitely recommended. It then asks me to select a storage account, and it actually asked me to go ahead and select a virtual network as well, so which I've done already. I'm just going to say okay, and it then asks me to create a replication policy, right? I can either create one but I've already created one for the demo purposes. I'm just going to say OK to that. All right, so that is done. So once I go here, then there's another section here called protected items, right? And it then shows me what are my replicated items, right? So I have already enabled replication for that VM. So once I click on that, it gives me a high level overview of what my replication health is, right? Have I ever performed a successful test? I haven't really performed because I set this up in the morning. My RPO is 2 seconds. This is live. So, last it polled around 858. If I just do a refresh, I probably will see a better value there. So if I get some more properties around that replicated virtual machine, is it protected? What location is it? What replication policy that I'm using? This is just a VM ID for Azure to use. What operating system is it? How many disks or how many protected disks? So when I go ahead and select a VM, I can define how many disks that I want. Let's assume that you have a VM with 5 disks, but you just want to replicate 4 of them. You can go ahead and define that as well. It gives you information around your storage accounts. And so Azure has, let's assume that you have a 2 GB VM and RAM size on your on-prem. You have to make sure that does Azure really have that instance type available, right? If it isn't, it's going to pick the closest of them and then try to create a VM out of it, right? So that's a little more information. Some information about compute and network is available as well. Right, so I can actually define upfront what I want. So on the other side, what is the name that I want to give, which resource group that I want here. So if you see, this guy here is 1 core 4 gig. This is my source VM, but here I'm selecting an A2V2 because that's the closest that I have, right? If you see here, I have 1 core 2 gig, but that doesn't really suffice my primary needs, right? The closest that I can actually get to is A2V2, which has 2 cores and 4 gigs of RAM. We can also go ahead and look at some network interfaces details. Target network interface type, that just then becomes your primary NIC, right? Also, whenever you spin up a VM on Azure, especially Windows-based VMs, they actually have licensing cost assigned to it as well. So if you have your own license, Microsoft allows you to go ahead and provide that information upfront, and it will then use those licenses while creating the virtual machines on the Azure platform. Disks information, this is going to tell you, what disk is being replicated. I have named it as converted, and it is basically protected, and what is the size of the disk that I'm actually replicating, right? So once I have that, let's just go ahead and try and perform a test failover, right? So 3 failover types that I was telling you that are available, which are test failover, and planned failover. So I'm just going to do a test failover here. It gives me a last recovery point, RTO, right? When I had this, when was the last time that actually the VM was replicated, and it also tells me which network that I want to then assign this VM to, right? So I'm just going to say OK. You can click on the too fast, so we'll just wait for it to work on that, and let's just go back to the slides for a moment. So the second type I was telling you guys is VMware to Azure, right? The implementation is slightly different. Over here, what you really need is a custom Windows virtual machine that you need to run on VMware. It basically is given out as an OVF file. You can then go ahead and deploy that to perform the replication of the VMs, right? So assume, and that same VM has multiple roles. We'll talk about those. The same VM can then also be used to replicate your physical infrastructure as well. So if you have any physical machines like your physical Windows and physical Linux boxes, they can also be used to replicate, or they can be replicated using this particular VM provided by Azure, right?
Question on the physical recovery. Yeah, on the physical recovery. So on the target side, the cloud side, so the physical become a VM?
Yes, it's a P2V.
Okay, if it converts in part of the replication strategy, or we have to make that happen as a preparation work.
So in Azure, everything is virtual, right? So you will create a virtual. I mean, it creates a virtual machine on Azure. So it's like your P2V, right? For example, and this is again a good migration strategy. So if you want to move something from on-prem, which is physical, and you want that workload to run as a VM in Azure, go ahead and use this ASR. That will do the job.
Hey, Adil, I have one question.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so when we do this planned failover or the test recovery, is it always from the cloud side or we can do from on-prem as well?
No, you have to log into the Azure portal and do it from there.
Okay.
All right. So as I was telling you, Microsoft calls this specialized server as a configuration server. It basically uses or it has three main different parts to it. This can either be deployed separately or they can be deployed in a single VM, right? In my case, I've just deployed it as a single virtual machine. Just notice the three things below. I'm sorry, the four server types that I'm actually talking about. First is a process server. Is basically used for caching, compression, and encryption, right? And you then have config server, which is basically used for centralized management. I'll actually go ahead and show you what we need to do once this VM is deployed and what type of details that it will ask for. And the third is basically mobility service. So the way this works is this has to be installed on every VM that you're basically trying to replicate. It captures the writes from the memory itself before it's written to the disk and then performs the replication, right? And it has another component which is called the master target. It's used for failback only, right? So it has three different things. One is a process server, config server, and master server, right? So these three have different roles to play. All three can be installed on a single VM, or they can be installed on different VMs depending on what your use case is, how big is the infrastructure that you're replicating. But for my demo purposes, one VM works okay, right? So any questions around this architecture here? Okay, cool. I'll take that as a no. Same concepts again. What do you do? Same five things as you would do typically on a Hyper-V setup. You prepare Azure, same things. You need to prepare storage account, virtual network, and your recovery services vault. As I said here, 1, 4, 5 remain the same. The only thing that typically changes is how would you prepare your VMware infrastructure, right? So you need to prepare an account on vCenter or ESXi host to automate the VM discovery. So, for example, today you only have two VMs on a single ESXi host. Tomorrow you go ahead and create a couple more, right? How does Azure know that you've created two more? So you need basically an account that can actually perform the discovery for you. And also you need to prepare an account for automatic installation of the mobility service. As I was telling you, this service is required to capture all the writes before they are written to the disk. And that's how the replication happens. In my case, to keep things simple, I'm using administrator vSphere or local to perform the discovery, and also to an extent I'm using either local accounts for Linux. If I have a Linux virtual machine that I'm replicating, I just use a local account to perform that installation of the service. And if it is a Windows machine and it's part of the Active Directory domain, you can actually go ahead and provide a domain account as well to perform the installation of that service. Review VMware server requirements. There are certain requirements. I can give you some documents to go and read through. And VM requirements, again, not all VM types can be instantiated or booted up on Azure. You got to be very careful in terms of what is supported by Azure. If VMware supported, that doesn't really mean that VM can then be booted on Azure as well. But 99.9% of the times, what VMware supports is usually supported on Azure as well, right? Setting up disaster recovery is pretty much the same. You enter the replication source and target. Over here, your source becomes your vCenter server, and the target remains as Azure. Set up the replication environment. You basically install the configuration server that I told you. Once it's booted up, you then provide details about your subscription, Azure subscription, and all that stuff that I'll just show you in a few minutes. On-premises recovery components, which is again your configuration server, and target replication environment, which is nothing but your network and storage and recovery services vault. You then create a replication policy. In my example, again, I'm just using the same replication policy to keep things simple. And you then go ahead and enable replication for your VMs. So that's done. And let's just go back and see whether that VM that's extremely slow.
Does it have any limitation on how many number of VMs we can recover in the Azure?
No, no limitations around that. Yeah, no limitations around that. So you can actually see here as well, once I go to my Hyper-V manager, if I click on the VM, and there's a replication tab available, which gives me information about, replication, what is my primary server, where am I replicating it to? This is to Microsoft Azure. As I said, it is possible to replicate to another Hyper-V server as well. Then ASR will actually act as your orchestration tool. And when was it last synchronized? Okay. So Hyper-V is pretty simple if it's a single host. If you have VMM, you install the provider part on the VMM server and the agent part on all your Hyper-V hosts. So let's quickly jump on to, we'll look at why it's taking a while longer, but let's just go to our configuration server here, right? So this, as I said, is given as an OVF file, which is roughly about 18 gigs, if I remember correct. And it's a specialized server. It basically has all the components that are required to perform the replication part for both your physical and VMware based workloads. And once you install it, you just have to click on this guy. It's already available on desktop, right? You have to click on this. So let's assume that, okay, so one moment. Let me log into my account. So I would then have to, let's assume that this was a straightforward vanilla install. I would have to actually establish a communication. So which basically means that this guy has to be able to talk to internet and provide information around that. So it basically checks your internet connection, make sure that your NIC is configured properly. For some reason it says failed. Yeah, no problem. And it basically needs an IP address assigned to it. It can either be a part of the domain or may not be a part of the domain. I will have to then provide information about my just give me one moment. Okay, that's better. Right, so everything seems fine from the connectivity perspective here. Oh, not really, man. Come on. Okay, anyways, so as I was telling you, all you really need from here is provide your recovery services WAR details. You have to first, at this page, you saw that login page, right? You just go ahead and log in from there and provide your Azure details, which account that you want, which will then automatically list out all the recovery services wall that you've created. I've just created one in my case, so I just select that. I can then manage my vCenters. I can go ahead and add my vCenter servers from here. And I can also provide my virtual machine credentials to install the mobility service. As I said, to keep things simple, for Linux, I'm just using the default root account. But if it's a Windows domain added machine, you can actually use your domain credentials as well. Right. So how would this then look in Azure? So let's just go back again, the way that we were talking about getting started, right? Let's see what are the different things that you would typically see from here. Yes, this is going to be a VMware environment. I'm basically doing from on-prem to Azure. I say okay to that. Again, it asks me for a deployment planner to give understanding of how much storage, how much network is required. Prepare, this is where you would actually, I mean, since I've already done this, otherwise you would be given a link to download the OVA file, right? So over here, I just go ahead and select this guy. And since once it was downloaded, installed, I have configured on the other screen that we saw, we configured and provided information about a vCenter and all of that. It auto-populates from there. Just say okay. Again, what my target environment is going to be, my storage account, my network account, and it then asks me to create a replication policy, right? So I've already created a replication policy. I'm using the same one for both Hyper-V and my virtual machine. I'm sorry, VMware virtual machines. So as an example, I'm going to go ahead and try and protect one of my VMs and see how that goes.
Adil, before going forward, I have one question here.
Sure.
So so first of all, where do we install that deployment planner? Is it on the OVF which we deploy?
No, the deployment planner is a completely different thing, which is basically used to understand what is your primary infrastructure, right? It just gives you a high-level overview of, okay, saying that you have 100 VMs, and for these 100 VMs, this is going to be the network throughput required, and this is going to be the storage that is required on Azure.
Okay.
So that has nothing to do with the configuration server.
So when that configuration server is deployed and we click on that desktop icon where we populate all the details, where we connect to our Azure account and we provide the vCenter server details, then only those details will be available here in Azure side, right?
Correct. You have to first do that preparation on your on-prem on-prem VMware infrastructure, and only then that auto-populates here.
So when we enable replication for a VMware-based VM, how that communication is flowing? Like what is the role of that on-prem VM that we deployed, the OVF, what it is called? I forgot the name.
So it's the configuration server. So that was explained in the architecture here, right? So if you look at this, config, so that VM will have 3 roles, right? It basically used for caching purposes. Process server is the one that's going to cache the writes, and it's then going to send it to your Azure, right? It performs a little bit of compression as well. I'm not too sure how great that is, because I haven't worked on an actual environment, and gives you some encryption capabilities as well. So process server is the one that is responsible for making sure that the replication is going properly. Config server is just used for management purposes.
So all these things are available inside that single VM, or we have to deploy this VM separately? Like
So in my example, I have done it, uh, as a single VM, but you can split those roles as well.
okay, cool.
Right?
Thank you.
Hey, no problem. So that is done. What is this guy complaining about? Demos never really work, right? So yeah, I'll just show you an example how you can actually go ahead and perform replication. How do you enable replication, right? So okay, I don't think you guys saw that, but let me just quickly go back. So once you go to recovery services vault, right, you have two options. As I said, this vault is used for both backup and replication purposes. So I click on this plus symbol here, right? So once I have that, basically tells me what is my on-prem and source location. I can either select a Hyper-V or a configuration server. So this is populating both because I've done this for both types of data sources. So I'm just going to select my configuration server here. What do I want? So once I select this, if I select this guy here, this drop down changes, right? Depending on what you select, that options or new options are available or removed. As I said, the configuration server is used to protect both VMware based workloads and physical workloads, which is why you have an option here, either physical or virtual, right? So I'm going to select virtual here. It will then ask me what is your vCenter server or your ESXi host, and what is the process server. So as I said, this is the guy who's going to take care of those processing and caching the writes and then passing it on to Azure, right? So this is an inbuilt. In my case, it's an inbuilt. You can actually, go ahead and deploy it separately as well. So I say okay to that. In target, it's going to ask me my subscription, what is the resource group, what deployment model again, storage account, and Azure network, right? So I can either select this to configure at a later time. I then don't have to provide any networking configuration. But if I select then now, it's going to ask me what is your Azure virtual network and what subnet that you want to spin up your new VMs that come up on the Azure platform. It then will ask me what VMs. Once I can select either of them, CentOS is I've already enabled for this guy earlier. I'm just going to select this, and this is not going to work because I had some issues around. I'm just showing you what the process flow is, right? So this is used for installing the mobility service, right? And I'm basically using an account which has capability root access, which allows me to install that particular agent. If this has only one disk, if it had multiple disks, it's going to give you a drop down asking you which disk out of all that you want to replicate, right? So you say okay to that. It then will ask you what is your replication policy. If nothing is created, you can then go ahead and create one. But in my case, I've already created one. I'm just going to select that and say okay, right? So that is the workflow for you to actually go ahead and enable replication on a virtual machine. Let's try and see if I can actually perform a failover on this guy. And sometimes if you see that, it's not automatically picking up the changes from your primary infrastructure, you can then look at the infrastructure side of things here, right? Now so it's basically segregated in the form that for Azure virtual machines, you have different network mappings. You can have policies on that. If you have a SCVMM, you're going to come to things around here. But in my case, I'm just looking at VMware, so I know I can just click on this guy. This is going to bring up my configuration server. You can actually go ahead and look at that. So once I double click on that, it gives me these three different components that I was telling you guys earlier. Process server gives me information about my vCenter server and my master target, which is basically used to perform failback operations, right? And the same configuration server can be used to manage multiple vCenter servers. If I click here, and if I have a new vCenter server that I want to manage from this guy, I can just go ahead and make that configuration from here itself, right? I don't have to go to my VM and then add another vCenter server from there. I can just do this from the Azure UI itself, the portal itself. And it gives you information about where this resides, what is the version, how many protected items you have, all that kind of stuff, right? So any questions? We'll see. Wait for this guy to work. Let's hope this works. At least I can show you guys. Yeah, cool. So,
yeah, Adil, I have
yeah.
one question.
Yeah.
See, normally in on-prem environment, we used to keep the IPs as static. So once we move to Azure, do we need to change that? How the recovery? If you are enabling a recovery, I heard somewhere. See, if you are send an IP address in static in Azure VM, that is not going to work. You have to redeploy the VM again. So
Correct. So Azure at this moment does not support static. It's going to be a DHCP assigned based on your subnet
but if I
configuration
have
level.
I see, if I'm taking from my on-prem to cloud, I already have one IP configured on that particular VM. So how I'll modify that? Is there any option for doing that?
Okay. So you basically your question is you want to retain the same IP address.
No, I don't want to retain the same IP address. If I wanted to see, I'm keeping my on-prem VM one copy in Azure as a replica copy. So and my on-prem is going down. It's because of some disaster happened. So I want to bring the replica copy in Azure. So in Azure is not going to support static IP. So we can configure static as a DHCP static or a DHCP IP from my IP pool. So, but still I have one IP configured in my server, right? If I'm bringing that
Go ahead.
particular.
I'm listening. Yeah, let's see what options are available, right? It's been some time that I actually logged into the portal, but let's see what options are available.
Okay, so I think here we will get two options. One is for a new the static IP, which we can define one IP, but that we are not defining into the server. It will be in Azure portal or DHCP.
Okay.
It's nothing. You are just defining one IP for that particular server from the DHCP pool. But
Okay, I can get back to you on that question. Yeah,
yeah,
I think I'll have to get back to you on that.
Yeah, you are. Actually, I just got because so day-to-day activity we never keep DHCP in on-prem. We always keep a static IP.
Correct. But yeah, I'll get back to you on that. Let me see what options are available, right?
Okay. So and again, one more addition to that, how the AD. So we have a on-prem AD, so we can keep the same Azure AD. We can keep a sync with Azure AD. Once the VM comes up, whether it will rejoin to that particular AD, how that is gonna work.
So I mean, you can actually have a domain controller installed on Azure,
Yes.
which then replicates to your on-prem. That's possible. It basically depends on
It's an
environment to
expansion
environment
of
basis.
our on-prem AD. But once the server is come up with a new IP in Azure, how we are going to sync with that? Is there any automation or anything on that? Like
I think you can use Azure functions to kind of get around that. But again, you will need another domain controller, which is part of the same domain on Azure running as well. So that's going to be a requirement.
So why I'm just get confused here, because if it is a normal environment, we have a console, we can go and at least manually we can go and change the IPs, or we can rejoin to the domain or something. We can do it. But if you're changing IP anyway, we have to rejoin to the domain, right? So how that is actually taking in an Azure? Just it's a convenient.
Changing IP doesn't require rejoin domain, Manoj.
Uh, it's not Manoj, it's
Doesn't
Sujit here.
require. It doesn't require. Oh, sorry, Sujit. I'm sorry. Yeah, doesn't require Sujit for changing an IP.
Okay, so
In case if you're in case if there's a trust issue between your domain controller and your machine, that's where only you need to join and unjoin the domain. I'm assuming if the Azure allows like a kind of a live replication, that's one option I feel. I mean, maybe like setting up one domain control in on-premise and one in cloud. So kind of enabling the replication, how we do it in day-to-day life, right?
correct.
That's
So
one option.
my just
If
intention
not,
is to just understand if a failover happened, you are bringing up your VM in Azure. So how much effort we need to put, actual workload needs to become to live. So whether we need to put some manual effort or there is any automation for that, just want to understand how that's gonna work.
I'll get back to you on that.
Yeah, we'll discuss later.
Sujit.
Adil. Yep.
Okay, cool. See, let's just wait. I think this should at least perform a failover. Let's see how that goes. Now, I mean, you guys have to understand, this is virtual lab, and within that virtual, a lot of VMs running, so it's going to be a little slow. So let's just go back to the slides and let's go to our Azure backup part of things, right? So that's all I had for site recovery at this point. Another thing that this is a very short thing. I do not have any demos for this. This is just to know that such a thing exists in Azure, and what you can use it, right? So as I said, this is a cloud-based service. It is to back up or protect and restore your data in Azure cloud. Why use? Because automatic storage management is possible depending on. Let's assume that you want to protect your virtual machines in Azure, which are installed in Azure by default. It's just a checkbox where you can just say, I want to protect this, and it automatically starts doing the job, right? Again, one of the things that you get in the cloud is unlimited scaling and multiple storage options that are available that we spoke about, the replication one. Second, different types of storage accounts, and third, whether are they going to be premium or standard disks, right? Unlimited data transfer possible, and you get data encryption at rest as well. Also, it gives you application consistent snapshots, right? So if you somebody had a question there, do we support? I mean, does Azure support native SQL backups? No, but it actually will give you application consistent backups if you have an application like an SQL or an Exchange. Long-term retention is possible. Azure says that you can have a retention period of 99 years, but I don't think anybody really cares for that long. Don't know what new technology will be available by then, right? But it's a marketing gimmick. You actually get 99 years of recovery points in Azure, right? So what are different ways? One is the backup agent that you need to install to perform the backup of on-prem. Second is, it is part of System Center DPM. The third is you actually go ahead and install a backup server on-prem. And last but not the least, you can back up your IaaS VMs by Azure extension that I was telling you, the checkbox that will then install an extension and allow you to back up your IaaS virtual machines in Azure, right? Now, depending on each type that you choose, some of the capabilities are going to be available and some not. So for example, recovery services, what is supported for all different port types of backup mechanism that you choose, right? But disk storage is only available with 2, and tape storage is only available with DPM, right? So some of the stuff that are incremental backups, again, for all of them, compression is not available for IaaS VMs, but is available for rest of them. I think that's pretty much what I had for today. Let's go back and see whether that okay, at least it started the failover and it created a virtual machine, or it's at least creating a virtual machine. Let's see if something comes up. Yeah, so you see CentOS test, it's creating right now, and this VM is then running in cloud. It's going to take a while, considering my lab is pretty slow. So, and you can go ahead and check the networking section for this VM. I hope something has come up. It basically created a network interface. It then assigned DHCP IP here. So looks like, Sujit, this is the case, but let me go back and check if there's any automation capabilities available. I'm sure there will be something through Azure Functions.
See, why
but it will.
Adil, why the question is, see, in our environment, we are actually migrating some workload to Azure. So we are using Commvault backup and taking the backup and we are replicating to Azure. So I just wanted to know whether how they are changing the IPs. So whether they are changing in the on-prem or they are making it in Azure. But Azure means I think you have to do some scripting or something because there is no console
Exactly,
access.
exactly.
So
I think that's where functions will come in, and there should be some capabilities around that,
yes, we'll discuss about that.
right? So, okay, cool. And this is the disk, 16 gigs. And if you once it's created on the other side, you can add additional data disks as well. Uh, you can then go ahead and change the size of the VM as well. So by default, I have given it a size, but once if you want to beef it up, you can actually go ahead and change it here as well. I think that's pretty much what you would see. Let's just see if the actual job completed or not. Yeah, the complete job was done, and it ended up starting the VM as well. And if I were to go ahead and assign a public IP address to this VM, I should then be able to access it. Otherwise, I would need something like a RDP box or a jump box, which will then allow me to connect to this VM, because I am not assigning any public IP address to this VM. It's just going to be a private IP address.
So, Sujit, question to you, right? See, you mentioned about assigning a static IP. Static IP can be assigned in the Azure portal, with a private IP, what I'm seeing here, right? So when you want to perform a failover kind of situation, you want to have the same IP in the target location as? It's like kind of
that's the NAS, yeah.
No, Balu. See, my concern is, on-prem, I'm keeping a static IP, okay? So maybe it's
That's
in
right.
192, 168, any series. You keep the same series, I'm going to keep it in Azure as well. But Azure is not supporting a static IP in a NIC. You can't configure a static IP inside the inside the OS. So it should be in Azure portal. If you are configuring into your NIC card in OS, that VM you are not able to access. This VM will go to orphan. That's what I heard. So I'm not sure, is there any development in that? Adil, am I correct?
Okay. Steve, not sure here. When I was doing the AT&T public cloud with the backend vCloud director, customers used to configure private IPs through the vXLAN, VLAN, and within the vCloud director. And they used to define their own networks, kind of thing. Flexibility is there, and then they used to have a NAT to the public IP. That's what it used to be. But even the virtual machine
Yes,
used to
actually,
have
the
a
why
static IP.
here is a confusion. Normally, we used to assign the static IP inside a server OS and under the NIC card, right? So, but in Azure, we are configuring static IP in the portal itself. So we are, see, actually there is a DHCP pool. I'm saying this IP should be always to this server. That's it. That is actual static configuration
Yep.
we are doing. But in our environment,
Yeah,
in
they
the
used to.
on-prem environment, we are going and we are configuring into the server, right? So that IP will be there in the replicated VM. So how it is? That's my concern.
Okay. So basically, you are when you log into the OS level, you don't see that it's just like a static IP. But when you do IP config, you are able to see the private IP that from the pool, right?
Yes, yes, I do agree that. But my question is, once I migrate from on-prem, I'm migrating with the IP which is configured in my NIC.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. But once in Azure, if it is
You're
coming,
expecting as it is.
no. See, the actual fact is in Azure, the static IP you can't configure it inside server OS. It should be in the Azure portal. So while migrating from on-prem to Azure, I already have one IP which is configured in my NIC card. So how I'll remove that before migrating? I should remove, or how that is working? That's what my concern. So we'll discuss about that.
Oh, okay,
I
okay,
think we
okay.
have to dig into it.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
Yeah.
Off the top of my head, I don't have an answer, but yeah, we'll figure it out.
Yes,
We'll
there
probably
will
get
be
to that.
there will be options because so many people are migrating
Maybe
and
some guest customization is triggering when a VM is getting recovered in Azure.
yes, maybe
Yeah.
one script can do that.
You might be right.
I mean, I see
And the thing is,
go ahead, Balu, go ahead.
when in the portal I use, like, we use a orchestrator portal, customized AT&T portal. So in that portal also same, the whatever you're explaining, Sujit, is the same way. So portal does all kinds of orchestration. That is why it retains IP address in the portal. So in the backend it communicates, different components like a network, load balancer, firewall, VPN, all those things. That's why the portal retains that IP address rather than in the OS level. I don't know how the binding happens with the IP address and the VM, but that's how it was designed. So I'm assuming the same way, but not sure about overall inside how the orchestration works in the Azure.
True. So sorry, this is Kuvar here. Okay. Because sorry, I'm adding here IBM Software. IBM Software give us the functionality to use your own IP on premises in the cloud. Okay. And second way, we can do the netting as well. But yes, what Balu said, this is very true. Orchestration back on the managing the IP address. Guest OS customization will not work here. If we run guest OS customization, definitely be aware about it's gonna to change some OS security ID and the guild as well, which creating a new OS identity. Okay, so this will not work because it did some changes. Okay, so the orchestration are through the agent. The things are posted on inside the OS to do the network configuration portion change. This could be happen. Okay.
Okay, great.
Now my question is, if let's say someone take a 99 years back, so where is data and how I'm going to export it back from cloud to on-premises? Because I want to reduce my recovery procedure. Okay, definitely if I supposed to recover it from cloud and it is physical server, it's going to take a lots of time.
I'm sorry. So you're basically telling how would you recover the data from the cloud?
First question, first procedure, I want to know, do we have a way to export my data back from cloud to my premises? Okay.
Okay.
And there I supposed to do the faster recovery instead of using the cloud to on-premises back recovery.
Off the top of my head, I don't know if Azure has that service available, but AWS has something called export import service, right? Basically, what they do is, for example, if you are, let's assume that you have terabytes of VMs that you want to replicate and you want to put that data on the other end, right? So what you can do is you can call AWS, give them a call, tell them, here, boss, I have my physical storage. Please go ahead and take this and put it on your data center so that I don't have to do that initial seeding, right? And so, I then only do incrementals post that, right? So that capability is available in AWS off the top of my head, but I guess Azure should have something there as well. I can get back to you on that offline. I don't remember what the service name is, but that should, and it implies to both import and export as well. So
exactly, it's not much more technical thing, but if anyhow the DPM things are implemented using in Azure, backup and recovery. So in a DPM, this function is available. Okay.
Okay.
So I think it should available in Azure as well. Okay.
Should be.
Because in DPM we can do the backup transfer to from the disk to tape and tape to the some other location as well. Okay.
Okay. Okay.
So these things are explored for the DPM. Okay. My next question, you talked about either we have used to internet to replicate our data. Okay. Either we have to be dedicated link with the Azure cloud. Okay.
Correct.
So what that thing?
Sorry. What was the last question?
We have a two-way to replicate data over internet or dedicated link between on-premises to dedicated Azure.
Correct.
So what links known as? Or
it's called express route. I think it's called express route. So
it might be like a private VPN, AVPN or VPN.
We are using express route for all
express route. Yeah. I usually get confused between the terminologies between Azure and this, but this is what it is, right? It's called express route. So it's basically a private VPN from your on-prem to Azure, and I can give you some links around that as well.
And for the IP questions, I have another use case. In my cluster, we using the Veritas cluster. Okay, that using the NIC and the MAC address. So basically, it's using MAC address for the as a fencing device. Okay, so I have to use the same MAC address. Okay, I do not. IP could be changed. I don't care, but I need my same MAC address, which is act as a fencing. So this also need to explore. Can I use the same MAC address instead of using the same IP?
Okay. Again, I don't think that's possible, but we can explore some other options. If there are something available online, we can check on that.
Yes. And what other tools are which is available as an orchestrator application? Like I know the Microsoft SCO, right? System Center Orchestrator. So similarly, I can use the VMware VRA or any other Ansible or Puppet as well to do this orchestration of the recovery service and backup of Microsoft Azure.
Yes.
Any API available?
Yeah. Most of the Azure services have APIs available. It should be possible. Yes.
So I can use the Azure API with my own orchestrator, not it's kind of a vendor locking to use the Microsoft System Center orchestrator, right?
No. These are public. So any public-facing API that Microsoft has published, if that performs that, if that is allowed to perform whatever operations that you do from the GUI, you should be able to use any orchestration tool to perform this.
All right.
Sujit, one thing what you can try is you get the list of IPs or a pool of IPs from the Azure portal, right? So when you deploy a VM in the Azure, you will get a private IP that shows in the portal. So give a try, assign the same IP address in the OS level and see if the VM is accessible. That's only one option I can think of to make it static.
Okay. But Balu, why I'm confused? I just went for that Azure training. The trainer was saying you can't configure any static IP, in the sense you can't configure an IP inside your OS. It should be in Azure portal. So normally, if you are migrating from your on-prem to Azure or anywhere, if it is on-prem is having a static IP which is configured in your NIC card, that will be there in the cloud as well, right? So
that's exactly right. That's exactly right. Yeah, even when I used to support AT&T Cloud Portal, it's the same thing we used to advise the customers: do not configure anything in the OS. So let the orchestration process decide what it's supposed to. So because when you disturb the orchestration process, it would not complete the overall step it's supposed to complete. So VM will go to orphan state, or they have to redeploy and all those things.
And also another answer for your question there. I'm so sorry to interrupt, Balu. Another answer to your question there, Sujit, because if you see here, your network adapter is one resource, right?
Correct.
So I can just take this guy and actually assign to any other VM, and it will get that IP address.
Okay.
Right. So that's why, it's not bound to an operating system because it's a completely different resource altogether.
Okay. So, but
So I've just went here and clicked on all resources. Basically, it tells me, what different resources I have. So it's a virtual machine, and for that virtual machine, I have, a different network adapter. So it's a completely different resource altogether. If in theory, I can just take this and assign to any other VM, and that will get that IP address.
yeah. So again, we're getting so much of question on this part. We'll discuss offline.
Okay,
That'll
great.
be good.
All right. I think we have another 10 minutes, guys. Any questions? I'm happy to take. But
Yeah,
I
I
think that's
have
pretty
few
much what I
questions.
have from the slide perspective.
Adil, I have few questions.
Uh-huh.
First of all, when we enable replication on the VMs, can we group them together based on the RPO requirement? Because all VMs might not be of like same criticality. So for few VMs, we need lower RPO, and for another, we can tolerate longer downtime.
Yes,
Or
that's possible. That's possible, yes.
so again, this will be done on the Azure portal. We have to
Yes.
create a group,
Yeah, so
right?
so the whole point is this service is available within Azure, right? So any of
Okay.
the management capabilities that you do are going to be possible either on the portal, or
Hmm.
you have PowerShell based commandlets, or you
Okay.
have something called Azure CLI, right? That's basically a cross-platform utility
Uh-huh.
available to manage your Azure subscriptions.
Okay. And is Hyper-V core supported or only Windows-based Hyper-V installation for replicating thing?
Uh, can you install Hyper-V role on the core Windows? Yes, I think so. It is
Yes.
supported. It is
Okay.
supported.
Okay. And the last question.
Hmm.
So since we saw that most of the things we do from Azure portal itself, so suppose if a disaster has struck in your data center,
Hmm.
and at the same time some outage happened in Azure, and you are not able to reach the Azure portal,
Hmm.
then do Microsoft have any plan for this kind of situation? Because this is a hypothetical situation, but it may occur.
I mean, yeah. So when you sign up for Azure, there are
Uh-huh.
certain SLAs based on
Okay.
what service you use.
Uh,
I think during your agreement they might agree to repay you or something based on how critical the situation was, and going the legal route and all of that. But yeah, and end of the day, that service has to be online for you to be able to perform anything. Even if portal is down and if the backend service is available, I can use PowerShell or Azure CLI to actually perform that orchestration. And like Kuvar said, I can use any third-party orchestration tool. If I understand how to use the APIs, then I can do the orchestration from there. And I don't necessarily have to go only to the portal to do this.
Yeah, but actually my question was regarding, because see, whatever is going to Azure, it might have an entry point in the infrastructure, like some core switches where all network traffic that is coming via internet or the express route we say, so that traffic must be terminating on some switches. So suppose if that switches is down, so your CLIs and APIs will also not work, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, so here it is. If you see here, these are the services that Microsoft offers, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they maintain this page where it tells you what service is affected at what time, right? So
Okay.
here's a good warning error. So if your site recovery is listed in one of the things here, and if
Mm-hmm.
that service is down, unfortunately, we cannot do much about it.
Okay.
So this page is called Azure Service Status or Azure Status. You can actually take a look at that,
Okay.
and it gets updated, I think, every minute or so. You see, this
Mhm.
was last updated 48 seconds ago.
Nice. Yeah, that's all from me.
Okay, great, great. So I think we have another 5 minutes.
I think we have another
Uh,
two minutes more.
okay, 2 minutes. Great. So Sujit, if you can just make a note of the questions that were not answered during the session, and just pass it over to me, and inshallah I can actually get back to you guys on
Yeah,
those.
anyway, I will go through the complete session again because I need to convert this raw video. So
Awesome.
uh,
Adil, quick question. Sorry, quick question. How do I get Azure subscription to start my learning? And what procedure need to follow? And what limitation is there?
Okay, so what I'll actually do is I had written a post around this. I'll actually go ahead and give you that. There are multiple ways that you can start off with. Right, so this is a post that I actually wrote a few days ago, actually a few months back. Um, so first is free account, right? As soon as you sign for a free account, you get $200 or actually $150, and that is available for the first 30 days, right? And it tells at the end of the trial, your services will be decommissioned, and you will not be charged for your credit card. That's one good thing. If you compare that to AWS, they start charging your credit card. But over here, once that subscription or once that $150 is completed, Microsoft is just going to shut down whatever you had created or delete whatever you had created, and it will ask you for you to upgrade the account. And at that point, it then becomes on-demand service, right? You pay as you go. Another option is MSDN. This is probably what I would recommend for most cases, because every month you get around $150 in credit, right? Um, but again, it's a little expensive. Depends on uh, whether you are willing to do this yourself. Then you have certain bespoke accounts, and pay as you go is another option. The other one is enterprise, where you are working for an organization. You have that. Another cool thing that I would recommend if you guys are into Microsoft related technologies, that the way that I have it is, one of the benefits of being a Microsoft MVP is that you get $150 or 10,000 Indian rupees every month to test Azure, right? So this is basically the reason Microsoft gives it is you basically test it yourself and spread awareness about the product to other people. And what I really get from there is the subscription, right? So I basically get a Visual Studio Enterprise license for a year, which includes $150 of credit per month. I think mine gets over around the October time frame. So I have about a couple of months left to do some testing. If you guys are into blogging and doing some stuff around Microsoft, you can always go ahead and apply for MVP. If you get selected, then this is one of the perks that you get out of it. But in most cases, Kuvar, just start with a free account. It gives you 200 credit or $200 for 30 days. I know you can't do a lot from it, but it's good enough for you to test the waters.
Perfect. So for MVP and all, so many things we can discuss offline.
Great,
okay.
Great. Yeah.
Yes, because I started learning Docker, okay, and exploring to 2016 and 2019 for container perspective. That time I visited in a Docker meetup event, okay. There I got a subscription to use it, but it's very limited for 100 hours, okay. So now I want to explore in a purely, okay.
Yeah. And also sometimes what happens is, like recently I was at a Azure event that we had in Bangalore. They were giving out vouchers worth $300, right? So I mean, if you attend any of these events, you can get some credits from there as well. So any event Microsoft is conducting, and if you get lucky, you can get some credits from there as well.
Yes.
Awesome. And I do have certain if you guys are preparing for some examinations, I intend to write my 7533 soon. I'm not sure if any of you have written, but I've recently started a series where I'm talking about each objectives and broken down into pieces as to how you perform this from different ways, right? So, for example, this I published today morning, where you talk about web apps, right? Basically, web app services are available in Azure as a PaaS service. where you can install your applications, and Microsoft takes care of the underlying hardware and operating system as well. So all you really need to care about is the application level, right? So there were some posts that I wrote around that. I've written some posts around compute, and I've also written some posts around storage. So if you guys want to get a hang of it, you can, and it's purely from the exam-based objectives. Maybe I don't go too much in depth, but if you guys are writing or intend to write the exam, this is a good resource that I'm actually creating.
That's great.